Can you even imagine the cold-blooded calculation it takes to stand in front of international news cameras, weeping for your missing wife, while secretly arranging for an emergency passport to flee the country? This is the reality of Brian Hooker. Most people would be scouring the coastline until their hands bled, but Brian, he was busy watching the clock. Just hours after telling the world he would never leave the Bahamas without Lynette, he was airborne, leaving her behind in the dark, turquoise depths of the Abacos. But the betrayal didn't stop at the shoreline. Today, the investigation into the disappearance of Lynette Hooker has taken a turn so disturbing, so strategically devious, that it has sent shockwaves through the maritime community. We are looking at a man who doesn't just lie with his words, he lies with his coordinates. The 46-foot sloop named Soulmate, a name that now carries a sickening irony, is no longer sitting at its mooring ball in Marsh Harbor. While the family of Lynette Hooker was busy raising money for a funeral they hoped they never have to hold, the primary crime scene in this mystery was being scrubbed and moved. In the dead of night, the vessel that witnessed whatever happened to Lynette began to move. It wasn't a slow, mournful departure. It was a high-speed tactical extraction. After 5 weeks of being watched by locals and international investigators, the boat suddenly shifted. It moved from the fresh, open waters of the harbor to a cramped mooring ball right against the docks of the Conch Inn. Why? Because you don't load a 46-foot yacht for an Atlantic crossing in the middle of a public bay where every captain with a pair of binoculars can see what you're putting in the hull. You have to ask yourself, why now? Why, after over a month of stagnation, is there suddenly a desperate rush to get this boat back to American soil? The answer lies in the asset. The Soulmate is a $100,000 piece of evidence. In the Bahamas, Brian Hooker is a ghost. He is a man under a cloud of suspicion who refuses to step foot back on the islands for fear of the Huskow. But in international waters, a boat can become a vacuum. By hiring a delivery captain and a skeleton crew, costing upwards of $8,000, Brian ensured that he didn't have to risk his own neck. He just needed the evidence out of the reach of Bahamian authorities. But here is where the shock turns into a forensic nightmare. As the Soulmate cleared the Marsh Harbor cut and began its journey westward toward Florida, something happened that should terrify anyone following this case. The AIS, the automatic identification system that acts as the digital heartbeat of every major vessel at sea, went dark. Someone on that boat reached out and flipped the switch. They ghosted the Atlantic. In 2026, with the technology we have, you don't just lose your GPS signal in the middle of a clear day unless you intend to disappear. This isn't Brian Hooker's first time playing with GPS data. The investigation has uncovered a dark chapter from his professional past, a termination from AT&T. Why was he fired? For masking the location data on his service truck. He is a man who professionally understood how to manipulate tracking systems to hide where he was and what he was doing. And now, as the Soulmate hauls ass across the ocean at 6.4 knots, that same expertise is being applied to a potential murder investigation. This isn't just a husband moving a boat. This is a forensic cleanup in motion. Every mile that boat travels further from the spot where Lynette disappeared is a mile where the trail grows colder. Every wave that hits that hull is a potential rinse of the evidence. Brian thinks he's being slick. He thinks that by staying in the shadows and letting a hired crew do the dirty work, he can outrun the truth. But what he didn't count on were the eyes on the water. Other captains, grieving families, and locals who loved Lynette are tracking his every move. They are watching the Soulmate flee the scene of the crime. And they are asking the one question Brian can't answer. If you have nothing to hide, why are you so afraid of being seen? To truly understand the depth of the deception we are dealing with, you have to look at the physics of the ocean, because the ocean doesn't have a reason to lie for Brian Hooker. Brian's entire defense, his whole innocent husband narrative, hinges on a single miraculous event, a 4.3-mile drift. He claims that after Lynette vanished from the dinghy, he spent 9 agonizing hours lost at sea at the mercy of the currents before finally washing up on the shores of Marsh Harbor. It sounds like a survival story from a Hollywood movie, doesn't it? But when you put that story under a forensic microscope, the math doesn't just fail, it implodes. In a masterclass level investigation, we don't just take a suspect's word, we test the environment. In 2026, independent maritime experts and local mariners conducted high-fidelity drift replications in the exact conditions Brian described. They waited for the 15-knot winds. They waited for the slack tide. They used the same rigid-style plastic dinghy. And the results? They are a devastating blow to Brian's credibility. In a real-world scenario, a boat like that doesn't take 9 hours to travel 4 miles. It takes barely 5. So, where was Brian Hooker for the other 4 hours? What was he doing in the dark, silent waters of the Abacos while his wife was supposedly drifting away into the abyss? Think about the sheer physical impossibility of his claim. Brian is a former Marine. He is a man trained in survival, a man with the muscle and the knowledge to handle a vessel. He claims he had one broken oar and was powerless. Yet, in replication tests, even a small woman with zero maritime training could paddle that same distance in a fraction of the time Brian claimed to be helpless. This suggests that Brian wasn't drifting, he was waiting. He was managing a clock. If you're trying to sell a story of a tragic accident, you need enough time to pass so that by the time you wash up, there is zero hope of finding a survivor. You need the ocean to do the work of a scavenger, but it gets even darker. When Brian finally scrambled through the brush to get help at the boatyard, his behavior was the opposite of a grieving husband. Imagine you just lost the love of your life to the sea. You would be screaming, you would be hysterical, you would be demanding every boat in the harbor launch immediately. Instead, Brian was calculated. He was quiet. He had the presence of mind to protect his own narrative. Forensic analysts have pointed out a sickening detail. Brian claimed the engine key lanyard was lost because Lynette was holding it when she bounced off the boat. Yet, the boat's engine and the logistics of that night suggest that the boat was strategically placed. Was the dinghy even drifting? Or was it towed? There is a growing theory among 2026 investigators that Brian used the Soulmate to position the dinghy closer to his rescue point before abandoning it. This would explain the massive gap in his timeline. It's the paddling duck theory. On the surface, he looks calm and helpless, but underneath the water, he is kicking furiously to stay ahead of the law. He tells the national media he would need a higher authority to tell him to stop looking for her, yet he didn't even call his own stepdaughter for hours after being rescued. If your world just ended, who is the first person you call? You call her children. You call her mother. You don't go underground and consult with lawyers about emergency passports. The 4.3-mile drift isn't a survival story, it's a GPS mask. Just like his termination from AT&T for faking his truck's location, Brian is trying to fake his location on the night of the disappearance. He wants us to believe the wind was his enemy, but the maritime charts prove the wind was actually his accomplice. It was blowing in a direction that would have made his drift much faster and more direct than he claimed. By stretching the time to 9 hours, he created a window of silence. A window where evidence could be disposed of, where a body could be moved, and where a story could be rehearsed. He's betting on the fact that most people don't understand nautical miles or tidal shifts. But he forgot one thing. The American crime bureau doesn't just watch the story. We calculate the truth. And the math says Brian Hooker is a liar. If he wasn't drifting for those 9 hours, what was he doing? The answer might lie in a place the locals are afraid to go, a place where the ruins of a destroyed resort hide secrets that were never meant to be unearthed. If the math of the drift doesn't line up, we have to look at the map. In the dark of that night, where could you hide a secret in a sea as clear as a swimming pool? The answer leads us to a desolate, haunting stretch of coastline, Snapper Point Marina. This isn't your typical tourist destination. It is a skeleton of a resort, a place desecrated by the 185-mile-per-hour winds of Hurricane Dorian in 2019. It's a graveyard of concrete foundations, twisted metal, and shattered tiles. And for someone looking to make a person disappear, it is a fortress of silence. The most chilling part? Brian Hooker knew this place intimately. Social media footage from February 2026 shows Brian, Lynette, and her daughter exploring these exact ruins just weeks before she vanished. They had paddleboarded and dinghied through the debris. Brian didn't need a GPS to find Snapper Point in the dark. He already had the layout memorized. While local fishermen rarely visit this remote, dead zone, Brian knew exactly how secluded it was. It's the perfect tactical choice, a place where you could be 3 miles from help and still be completely invisible. Forensic experts have raised a terrifying point about the geography of the Abacos. You can't just dig a hole there. The ground isn't soft soil, it's solid coral rock. To bury anything deep would require heavy machinery or hours of grueling work that Brian simply didn't have. But at Snapper Point, you don't need a shovel. The ruins are piled high with detritus, huge mounds of fallen trees and hurricane wreckage that haven't been touched in 7 years. It's a landscape of ready-made graves. If you were desperate to hide a body and ensure it was never found by a search party looking in the water, you would move it to the one place where the terrain itself hides the newly disturbed earth. In May 2026, tipsters began searching these ruins, filming the exact paths Lynette once walked. The footage is transfixing and tragic. Every time an aquamarine fragment or a flash of green plastic appears in the debris, hearts stop. Is that her bathing suit cover-up? Is that her dry bag? While Brian claims she floated away into the deep ocean, the locals are looking at the land. They know that if she were in the Sea of Abaco, the sharks or the tides would have brought something back to the surface. The fact that not a single piece of her gear has washed up suggests she was never at the mercy of the current. She was placed somewhere. Brian's story relies on the ocean being a void, but the ruins of Snapper Point tell a different story. It's a place where secrets are buried under the weight of a natural disaster. If Brian Hooker wanted to escape a murder charge, he knew he couldn't let her body float. He needed her to stay exactly where he put her. As the investigation shifts from the water to the wreckage of this abandoned marina, the question isn't just what happened on the boat, it's what is hidden beneath the concrete of Snapper Point. The clock is ticking, and the walls are finally closing in on Brian Hooker. This isn't a game of hide and seek anymore. It's a high-stakes forensic manhunt. As the Soulmate crosses into American waters, it isn't just a boat, it's a floating crime scene under a microscope. Brian's history of masking his location at AT&T wasn't just a career failure, it was a psychological blueprint. He is a man who believes he can outsmart the very technology designed to track him, but in 2026, the digital trail never truly goes cold. While Brian hides behind lawyers and hires crews to move his assets, the family he abandoned is fighting back with a fury he never anticipated. Darlene and Carly aren't just grieving, they are mobilizing. They are heading to the Bahamas to demand that the authorities stop looking at the horizon and start looking at the man in the mirror. They know that if Brian's story were true, he would be the first person on that boat searching for her. Instead, he gave the world his middle finger and went underground. The irony of the name Soulmate is now a haunting reminder of the woman Brian left behind. But the American maritime community is small, and its memory is long. Every captain who spotted that boat ghosting its AIS has filed a report. Every piece of footage from Snapper Point is being analyzed for the smallest forensic anomaly. Brian Hooker thinks he escaped the Huskow in the Bahamas, but he's sailing straight into a federal storm in the United States. The evidence is mounting, the lies are failing, and the ocean is done keeping his secrets. Lynette deserves justice, and as the investigation hits its breaking point, one thing is certain: Brian Hooker is running out of ocean.